So the backstory is I got really sick last year, January 23. Doctors couldn't figure out what it was. Long story short, I was misdiagnosed with some relatively benign inner ear infection that ended up being like not a benign inner ear infection at all, but a very deadly, what turned out to be a brain abscess that could have popped at any point, basically killing me on the spot. Journalism is a great force function for learning. You have to learn. To be a successful journalist, you have to be a good learner. Just thinking like this is genius. I mean, this is genius level stuff. And I'll never forget that. Actually, that same editor came back to me, and he just stopped at my desk and he goes, "Did you file 10,000 words for that story?" I said, "Yeah," and he goes, "I needed 1,000." But yeah, that network I think a lot about now is like that the sort of safety net, the people around you are incredibly important, especially in these moments of kind of extreme duress.
Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Ziegler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Ziegler is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of Sunpoint Investments.
Welcome to The Intentional Investor. You are here on Epsilon Theory YouTube. I'm Matt Ziegler. Man, do I have a guest for you today. Now, most finance up-and-comers, you might say, they're too big for their britches, but this guest, he's too big for his thinker. And that might sound dirty, but there's just so much good stuff coming out of this guy. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean he's too big for his thinker? Is it because he's a former investigative journalist? Not Anderson Cooper, not whatever Google says is tops right now. I'm apparently very out of touch on this, I've just learned. He's like the Harriet the Spy of the industrial private prison system, though. I mean, crazy work in the New Yorker. Love that run of articles. And maybe as a former journalist, and just the act of writing stuff down on a deadline, the practice to clearly articulate what ink readers want to know, kind of like the Hey Arnold meets The Wire, writing for The Wire about Twitter. That level of just craziness in the lead up to that roadshow. And as many of you probably will know him, a man who's very now public, dark night of the soul, came when he had a grape-sized abscess somewhere in between his ear holes, which you can go watch about that on the Today Show if you want. I'm sure we're going to touch upon it, but we got bigger questions. We got bigger fish to fry. We got big things to think. Ladies and gentlemen, the Nightcrawler himself, Mr. Eric Markowitz. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. That was the best introduction, man. I'm gonna have my wife listen to that later.
Please welcome your wife into the big think here with us. I want to start here. I know people know you now in the investment industry and the background of the investigative journalism, all those niceties we just threw out there. But I have it on semi-good authority that you don't always pick winners. I have it on semi-good authority that at a college Battle of the Bands, your second place runner-up probably should have been first. And I'm just out here standing for the SG band right now. We're still holding grudges from 2006 or so.
That's right. Yeah.
What's that story? Who did you pass up on at your college Battle of the Bands?
Yeah. So this was as you know, I was the music editor for a period of time at my college newspaper at New York University, NYU, and as legend has it, there was a battle of the bands, and I was to pick the winner and the loser. And I believe the name, I think I told you this the other day, was Dibble Edge. That was, some people can fact check me on this. But the loser was a young woman named Stephanie, who now goes by Lady Gaga.
Future's hard to predict, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. So yeah, not all my picks are correct. That's for sure. That's a promise.
Now that we have that promise off the table for the good compliance people out there, I want to go back. I'm really fascinated in well before the NYU music editor days. tell me about this house you grew up in. We can relate probably a lot on what our parents did for work. Tell me what mom and dad did for work. Just talk about this a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I grew up in a great house. I mean, we were um, kind of a pretty normal middle class, upper middle class family. My mom was an English teacher. My dad was an engineer, and I think my interest in language and writing obviously came from my mom early on. I remember over the summers she would have us do book reports, and as a prize, she would give us these little gifts from the dollar store, something like um, you know like an eraser or a pencil, something. But to me that was like phenomenal. Um, and my dad was just like a really, really sweet and smart, and he still is, engineer at heart. I mean, just pure math and science guy. Went to Cooper Union, went to Bronx High, grew up in the Bronx. Really, really intelligent. And so I think I just mentioned that because between the two of them, it's sort of like this interesting blend of growing up with a parent who is probably more math and science focused, and a parent who's really English and the arts, and so I think I was kind of interested in both. And I was like really I went to like kind of a normal summer camp where I made a lot of friends. I had a pretty good childhood. My one thing growing up was I just wanted to live in New York because I was a Jersey kid, and as people from New Jersey know, um, there's like a stigma of being from New Jersey for whatever reason. But I have a lot of Jersey pride, but I really wanted to live in Manhattan. So all growing up, I just desperately wanted to live in Manhattan. And so I went to NYU.
We're getting to NYU, and we'll rep some Jersey pride here for you in full. I'm just curious, like what age range does mom teach English, and what kind of engineering does dad do?
Yeah. So my mom was a high school English teacher. So 10th grade, 11th grade. And my dad was actually a chemical engineer. But for most of the time growing up, he was a safety engineer. And so he worked for like a big risk insurance company. And so he would like fly around the country and go to these ramshackle industrial complexes and be like, you guys have to fix these, sort of like OSHA before OSHA comes. He's the guy that works for the insurance company to make sure there's no major lawsuits. So that was sort of his profession growing up, to make sure things were safe.
Did that translate through like to the household? Was he the buckle up guy's dad? Or I know that was probably the era too, but
Yeah, I definitely there was definitely a sense, and I feel it, to this day, of like risk aversion, right? Like play things safe. And I often think like my career and my direction has been very much the opposite, more risky or risk taking. But yeah, he was definitely like very emphasizing, or just early on emphasizing, this idea of safety. And probably, I never really think about it now, but it's like an early sort of just an early education of how to think about the world. It's a certain framing or lens through which you kind of see everything.
What about like, I'm not interested in the books that maybe your mom imposed on you, unless there's any where you're like, thank God she got me to read whatever. But what about the first like books or written words that you're engaging with, that you're, this is my interest, this speaks to me? What were some of those things?
God, that's a really good question. I really like, I think I don't remember the names of these books now. I mean, like the Boxcar Boys. I'm trying to think of like the earliest memories of like books that really were kind of like mystery and detective, investigative work.
I was kind of curious if there was going to be like a Hardy Boys or Boxcar.
Yeah,
Boys
exactly.
or something in there.
Totally. Yeah. No, I haven't thought about these in like 30 years. So thank you, Matt. But I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that there was like an element of, maybe because my childhood was relatively non-exciting. I was seeking out that excitement through literary work and through TV and movies.
So what about like TV and movies? Are there any things like that were starting to pick at those. Man, I really, really love this.
Yeah, I mean, I was like a huge Simpsons fan growing up, and I think like the sense of humor of that just kind of colored my own sort of cynical, sort of like sarcastic sense of humor too. So yeah, if you're a Simpsons fan, you know it's like it is the best show ever made by far. It's the depth of the characters and just the level of humor. It's great. It's fantastic.
That's awesome. The as a Jersey kid, it is part of your birthright to like sneak out of Jersey and sneak into Manhattan.
Right.
Usually when you're not old enough to do so yet.
100%.
Do you have any good stories or any fun nights in the big city?
You know, it's funny. I just went to a concert here in Portland. The first one I've been to in many years, Built to Spill. And I went to a Built to Spill show in high school when I was like 15 or 16. And definitely, you know, kind of told my parents I was doing something else, ended up at this Built to Spill show. And I was with two buddies, and we, for whatever reason, we couldn't get back. I guess after midnight, the Port Authority buses shut down. So we decided we'd walk back across the George Washington Bridge because we lived pretty close to Manhattan. It was not unfeasible to walk back home. And I'll never forget, we were like halfway across the bridge and there was a gate. Couldn't get around the gate, tried hopping the fence to get over the gate, and immediately just saw the blue lights and the sirens, like, you know, stopped by the police. Like, what are you guys doing? So I think I forget exactly what happened. They escorted us across the bridge and got back home. But yeah, that was probably a night that my parents won't know about until if they listen to this show.
Okay. We won't send them any copies of this one. Well, your wife can pre-screen anything that goes to your parents secondarily. So they never found out about this?
No.
Like the police just escorted you and were just like...
Yeah, it was kind of like, what do you guys do? I mean, it was not really like, we were just kind of idiots.
Yeah,
you know? We weren't doing anything.
Doing something dumb.
Yeah.
We weren't doing anything bad.
Exactly. We weren't doing anything particularly dangerous. It was more just like a head scratcher moment for that cop, I'm sure.
So what about like NYU? Why'd you want to apply to NYU? Why'd you clock that at all? Or was it just to get to the city?
I think like if you were to ask me that when I was applying, I'd probably have some really articulate, thoughtful answer about why this school.
I have no doubts.
I'm sure. I'm sure the essay was like very, very clear. Yeah. I think in retrospect, I just loved Manhattan. I mean, Manhattan was really ultimately my first love. I just love the city. I love the energy of being downtown. I knew that I wanted to do something sort of creative, and I actually look at both business and writing as kind of both creative fields. And NYU was like a great home for that. So I think beyond the academics, I grew up with a lot of friends that lived in Manhattan. One of whom lived in the West Village, and a bunch lived on the Upper West Side. And I was just drawn to it. I mean, it was like this big magnet for me. And I really never thought that I'd leave. Life has a funny way of throwing kind of curveballs and turns you didn't expect. But in that moment, I moved into the city when I was 17 because I was a little young. And it was like the greatest night ever, that first night in the city. It was just like the feeling of like, I'm here, I'm in the city, anything can happen. I think people who live in Manhattan will kind of, or who have lived in Manhattan will understand like that energy is irreplaceable. And it's very unique to Manhattan. And so I, like I said, it was my first love. I just loved being there.
Did a lot of your high school friends or how much of that core group from high school and growing up ends up in the city with you? Like how many of those relationships carry across your college experience?
Man, it's just, I'm not like none. I mean, I'm still,
oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm still like best friends with 3 guys who I grew up with starting when I was like 3 years old, but we never went to school together.
Really?
Yeah, we all went to, one of them is a friend from synagogue, another is from Cub Scouts, another is sort of like a friend of the friend. But yeah, I also went to like a very religious, Orthodox Jewish school growing up. And I never really saw myself as part of that community. My parents wanted me to go. After 8th grade, I left. I went to public school. And, I never really carried on any of those friendships. So I maintained these friends that I had, Jeff, Jeremy, and Ben, who are still like my brothers. But as far as taking friends from high school into the city and beyond, it was like a clear split. Like high school ended, and those friendships were kind of over, and started new friendships, which for a long time I felt sort of badly about that. But I think as I've gotten older, I've sort of recognized that relationships aren't necessarily static. That there's some rhythm to these things, and it's actually more natural than not for certain relationships to end. So I look back fondly at a lot of my high school friendships, but never really carried through. And really thankful that I have those three kind of core friends from growing up, though.
Were those three friends all part of that like kindergarten through eighth or pre-kindergarten through eighth experience, just from those three different areas? Synagogue, Cub Scouts, and friend of a friend? Like just
None of them went to my school, but we just lived in the same town. And yeah, we've just now, I mean, we live all like lives in Berlin, one lives in North Carolina, one lives in Massachusetts, but we all started kind of in the same place.
That's amazing. And still in regular, like at these like
Yeah, we got like
like
stupid group chat.
stuff.
Yeah, totally. I we all we saw the last time we saw each other was a couple of years ago. I mean, it tends to be at weddings or other get-togethers like that. But everyone's got kids now, and things are infinitely more complicated with work and lives and kids and everything. So, but we still have a very active group chat on WhatsApp.
did you have a rager of a bar mitzvah?
Oh yeah. We had a magician. We had a really strong-willed DJ who I didn't want to dance.
Strong-willed?
Oh yeah, strong-willed. He was like, you get your ass on the dance floor, and I was 13 and awkward and shy, didn't want to do any of it. Yeah, but with big bar mitzvah culture growing up.
Yeah, well, Jersey, that area,
Oh, yeah.
that era. Yeah, it was earned. Okay, so you get to NYU, first night in the city, like 17. I'm assuming nothing like too crazy happens. It's just the energy of being in the city. What's it like just digging into college and digging into school? Does the interest in when do you declare your major? I'm assuming it's writing or journalism or something like that, or is it not?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty early on, kind of knew what I wanted to do, which was a mix of journalism and business. And NYU has sort of a program in Stern, the business school, that's accessible to the arts kids, the arts and science kids. So I did a sort of dual program. I did my journalism degree while also doing this. I think they called it like a pre-business or business minor, and also a creative writing minor. So I was like in heaven academically. Some of my professors were, especially on the writing side and journalism side. I mean, my mentor in college was James McBride, who wrote The Color of Water and a bunch of other great books. These were people I got to interact with pretty much every day at school. So it was a wonderful place to really like get some great academic experience. And then plus I was able to intern during the year. My first internship was at Vanity Fair, which was a magazine that I had like admired growing up, knew nothing about how it worked or actually anything about what it was like to work at a magazine. But yeah, my early like obsession was magazines, and but also sort of like on the business writing side. I remember I had to like one day at my editorial internship, the assistant was out, so I had to cover the phone and get a phone call, and it was Michael Lewis calling for his editor, and it was just like, oh, this is the coolest,
This is a cool thing.
Yeah.
What was it about getting exposed? Because like you got to learn the way these things work on the inside.
Yeah.
And when you get put into that situation as an intern or otherwise, and you start to see the actual machinations of how this comes together, because I'm presuming like you meet the people writing the story, you meet the people doing ad sales.
Yeah.
You get a very quick understanding of how this is actually laid out. What did your brain do with that?
Yeah, I think I was like probably on some level intimidated by the whole process. I mean, Vanity Fair this was when they were still in Times Square. I think it was like 4 Times Square, and
mid 2000s.
it was like this was like middle of the financial crisis, which kind of plays into the story. It's like 2008. So I was an intern there, and for people who are interns in this era, that maybe they'll remember, but you got paid minimum wage, and then there was a period where they basically said we can't afford minimum wage anymore, and then you knew the economy was really bad. When they flipped from whatever it was, $8 an hour to nothing. But yeah, watching this magazine kind of come together for 12 issues every year, it was incredible, to see it from the inside, kind of like the business side, the ad sales, but really the editorial where I was. The amount of research that went into stories I thought was like fascinating to me. I got to work on some research pieces for this guy, William Langevishu, who is a great long form investigative journalist. And I'll never forget, I helped package up 2 suitcases of books to send to him wherever he was. And it was about, I think it was, the FBI's involvement in Pakistan. And really, really so to me, I mean, that was like a physical display of how much work goes into a story. And I was always impressed by that. And, I always had kind of a love for journalism, but seeing that and seeing both the reverence for it, but also the personalities within the business. I mean, this was the era of Graydon Carter, still smoking cigars, whatever he did in his office. And I mean, there were some really, really like big personalities in that in that Vanity Fair period, and like an incomparable experience for a 19-year-old kid who's interested in journalism. So I say all that, which is, yeah, NYU was a cool school, but I mean, just living in Manhattan, having the opportunity to have that kind of internship when you're 19 is a very, very like special, privileged experience.
That's crazy. Any other notable either internships or pre-graduation work experience?
I mean, I did a bunch of jobs, but like nothing that interesting for you. I wouldn't bore your audience with the crappy jobs I had throughout college. That was my prestige job, was at Vanity Fair.
Any noteworthy crappy jobs? I mean, the Devil Wears Prada of like a corner hot dog stand. Like, what do we got here?
I worked at well, I mean, within publishing, I if you remember Time Out magazine, I don't know if they're still around, but Time Out was a big magazine in New York.
I can picture the cover. Yeah.
I thought I was getting an editorial job, and I showed up, and they were like, okay, you got to sell 50 subscriptions by the end of the week. And I was like, I don't know if this is what I signed up. So I remember going back to my dorm and trying to sell some subscriptions to some people in the dorm. I'm not a sales guy. This isn't for me.
It's not gonna work out.
No, and I worked for LTV Media, which is a media company. I don't know if she still owns it, but Louise Bluin. Anyway, she owns a bunch of art magazines, and I worked in the marketing department for those art magazines. And again, that was like, sounds kind of glamorous, but I think I basically stuffed envelopes for 20 hours a week and sent out mailers. So nothing too glamorous there.
So you're finishing up the education. Do you feel direction that you want to go the Vanity Fair route? Like, you want to go do editorial somewhere? You want to go do something?
Yeah.
What's that bridge to, like, I'm graduating, here's where the other side of the bridge is, and there's not a gate on it. It's not the GW.
Yeah. The legal bridge.
The legal bridge.
Yeah. If I think back to that period, I mean, again, this is like 20 years ago, but I mean, I desperately wanted to go into business journalism. I mean, that was my goal. And this was like financial crisis. Media companies were shutting down. There was no budget for anything. And I had student loans. I didn't come from a wealthy family. I needed a job. And so I think I spent like a couple of months, maybe more, leading up to my graduation, looking for jobs in journalism. But there was just nothing. I mean, for me, coming out of, there were like the guys I was going up against, people maybe with 5 or 10 years of experience who had been laid off. And so that's who was getting the entry level jobs then. So I decided to basically take a detour my first job out of college was for the Lefrak organization. If people from New York know Lefrak City, they're a very wealthy family that owns some crazy percentage of Brooklyn and Queens residential real estate, but they've expanded their interests California, Florida, all over. So I worked for the Lefrak family in the marketing department. They own a big chunk of Jersey City called Newport. So I had an office there. I worked with some really interesting characters. I learned a lot about business. I was had like a front row seat to working for a billionaire, which was like fantastic. I think when you're 22 to have that kind of experience, especially given my career now and investing and really being able to I think there's a very big difference working for a corporation versus working for a family run business. And they were, very large. They're a multi-billion-dollar family. Their residential real estate portfolio is massive. So it's a very large organization. But because of the nature of the family, I was able to interact with the key principals fairly regularly and got to see, I guess, like the real side of this business. And it was fantastic. It was a strange job in a lot of ways. It's not something I wanted to do, but for a year it was fantastic. I got, I think some people may know Jamie Lefrak is the son of Richard Lefrak. Richard Lefrak is the patriarch of the family, and got to work a little bit with Jamie. He was a very smart guy. Really enjoyed working with him, and I'll never forget my first meeting with him. They have a lot of residential real estate that's kind of geared, that's sort of lower rents, and a lot of the tenants are, I don't know, lower middle class people. And I said, so what's your marketing strategy for those buildings? And he just shrugged his shoulders. He said, you put a sign on the door. And I was like, that's, this was just like an interesting kind of first introduction to that business for me of, how he thought about marketing, which was like pure supply and demand. And then for the residential portfolio that was more luxury, that was, a totally different perspective on marketing and sales. So ultimately, real estate was not something I wanted to go into. I knew that I didn't going into it. It was a job. And it ultimately segued into my first job as a magazine reporter. But for a year, I got to, cosplay as a real estate guy in New York.
How do you make the link to the first writing job away from that? So that's not for you, but how's that bridge happen?
Yeah, it was a good friend of mine from journalism school. My friend Issy, she was working at Inc., the magazine. She said there's an internship opening, and it paid. And I said, I'll take it. Didn't ask any questions. I was really desperate to get my foot in the door of a really good business publication. I really wanted to have that experience. And so I knew even if it was an internship, I was going to work my ass off and just basically work my way up. And so that was probably about a year after I started the real estate job, and I started as an intern. And within a month or two, I'd been hired as a full-time reporter. So that was really the early days. It was not, a glamorous, getting recruited out of college by a big magazine to go write a cover story. It was, the early days of being an intern back when magazines still did fact checking. I did fact checking. Very, very small, short magazine, little stories. And it was a great, place to kind of cut your teeth as a reporter and learn about business.
Do you think having the period working for the real estate company, not that it makes a paid internship sweeter, that's not the point I want to make, but there is something when you see all those doors shut and then you have the tiniest opening, not that you wouldn't have applied yourself straight out of school, the same tenacity perhaps, but that impact the way you went into it, where you were like, finally, I'm getting my shot. I'm not going to screw this up.
Yeah, it was half. So it was I remember I took a pay cut of half of what I was making. Sure. And I wasn't making a lot with the real estate company. I think that life, you have these series of big kind of leverage moments or big turning points. And there's really actually, in retrospect, only a few big ones. For me, that was a big one. And so I knew that I was going to make it really, really important. I was really, for whatever reason, ambitious to work my way up within that organization. And I think that, yeah, I was like super hungry because of how challenging the job market was at that point. Also, frankly, it's a very competitive field. They don't give out reporting jobs at good magazines. I mean, this is like a very, very, I mean, it's not just skill. It's also really kind of how you can network and how you can kind of prove your value within a magazine like that. So I I remember they had the interns up on kind of the bar that you didn't even get a full desk. And I remember thinking, I'm gonna get a full desk one day. Not even an office. I just like thinking, I'm up at the bar now. I'm gonna get a cubicle. That's the next step.
How long did you get the cubicle?
I think I mean within 3-4 months. I look back and I think when I think about like giving advice to young people starting their careers, like this was a classic case of I just was there before everyone else in the day and I left after everyone else. And so I just was there. I mean, I just was hanging around a lot. I think at a certain point people were like, what's this guy doing here all the time? You know, I just was around, and I just really wanted to stay there. So I just kind of like planted myself there and wouldn't leave to an extent.
So actually say one more thing. And this was a friend from journalism school. She got you the.
Yeah, my friend Issy Lepowski, who's still a good friend.
Good job, Issy Lepowski. Who's the first person like inside of the organization, or what's the first project, assignment, whatever you get, where I don't want to say you were like, I made it, but you were like, oh wow, now it's real.
Yeah. So I remember it very, very vividly. I was assigned to write about Anthony Wood of Roku. And Roku at this point was not a publicly traded company. And my assignment was to basically get to interview Anthony, and this was for the print magazine, and do 50 to 100 words on the guy, which is a very, very small, like just, it's a nothing thing. And I kept screwing it up somehow. Like my editor, I interviewed Anthony, he was very gracious. But the 50 to 100 words was just like not cutting it to the editor. And he kept sending it back to me. This is not
so short.
So short.
So
right.
short.
It's like tiny. I mean, it's like a sentence.
This is effectively a tweet. Like people need to understand. Yeah. Okay.
So I was, really sweating this because this was my first big opportunity to write for the magazine. And I kept kind of, for whatever reason, my editor was like pushing really hard. It wasn't what he wanted. It wasn't the right quote. But then I remember like the third or fourth time I maybe did another interview with Anthony. The editor responded like, "This is great," or something just very basic. Good job. And I remember thinking, "Oh, this is the best feeling in the world. Like I've gotten, my little ink splash on the page." And I remember emailing James McBride, my old journalism mentor, and I just told him about this, and I said, "What a great feeling to finally get published." Basically, in retrospect, like tiny piece, who cares? But for me in that moment, as like 21, 22 years old, it was a special feeling.
You got any idea from the editor's perspective? What didn't you understand the first like 3 passes, do you think, from the editor's perspective?
I just don't think it was very interesting, right? I think there's a quote, brevity is the soul of wit. I mean, this idea of like, I forget who said it, maybe Mark Twain, but if I only had a longer amount of time, I could have written a shorter letter. Like this idea that writing short is actually extraordinarily hard. So I think it was just an extremely hard assignment to start with, which is, give me 50 to 100 words, make it really interesting, compelling, have a story packed in. It's like, how? So I don't recall exactly what the feedback was, but I think the assignment was, I wouldn't assign a 22-year-old, go interview a CEO and come back with a 100-word story. It's insane.
Which maybe that's part of the sorting process. I'm not saying like that's what they were doing, but it's also kind of like,
Maybe, yeah.
if you can get this down, you're proving ourselves. So what's the next? And feel free to like skip a level or two, but like, what's the next like level up where you go from getting your 100 words? I mean, just having the excuse to talk to a CEO.
Yeah.
That's got to be a pretty cool feeling in a journalist capacity.
Totally. Yeah.
Not in the marketing department for the billionaire, in a official sanctioned journalism capacity. So what's the next thing up? When do you get to write 500 words or something?
Yeah. So, I mean, that job was great because it like, I think it really taught me how business worked, right? The job was to speak with as many CEOs, entrepreneurs as humanly possible, understand how their business works, what makes it interesting. And a lot of them are trying to pitch you on, hey, our business is going to be huge and here's why, which is a great training ground for being an investor because, I mean, that's what public markets is. It's just basically CEOs saying why their stock price is going to go up. So you develop like a bullshit detector to a degree. But the next story that I really it's like a big opportunity for me. I think it was the first time I really got to travel and take like a big trip. And I did this story on Startup Weekend, which was a big thing in the mid 2010s where a bunch of people would get together, do a big hackathon, start companies. And it was for the magazine, which was always a bit of a prestige versus writing for the web. And I wrote, to me, in my mind, I was like Hunter S. Thompson on the road. Like I'm Hunter S. Thompson, I'm Tom Wolfe.
The glasses on,
yeah,
the cigarette on the stick. Yeah,
totally. And I'm thinking this is the next great American, narrative nonfiction story ever. So I ended up writing that story. I submitted like some ungodly amount of words, like 9,000 words or 10,000 words. And just thinking like, this is genius. I mean, this is genius level stuff. And I'll never forget that actually that same editor came back to me and he just stopped at my desk and he goes, "Did you file 10,000 words for that story?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I needed 1,000." It's like, it was just like, I had basically, fancied myself this like great long form journalist in this moment. I'm sure whatever I wrote was fine, but it was certainly not, worthy of a 10,000 word piece. So again, it was like a process of editing it down to something that was good and reasonable. And I think that I think that it's a great, like, journalism is just a great early career for anyone who is working in a creative field, because you're basically tasked with going out into the world, figuring out how something works, packaging it in a smart way, and explaining it to an audience of people that are interested in the subject. And so really, like, journalism is a great force function for learning. You have to learn. To be a successful journalist, you have to be a good learner. And I think I also learned a lot about, basically how information is packaged, how it's conveyed, and ultimately how to work with people. I think like the other skill set that you develop as a journalist is you have to learn how to talk to people. You have to learn how to ask them questions. You have to learn how to basically make yourself likable to the extent that people want to share information with you. I'm not, that's a skill I'm still working on. But I think it's a really, like, I just wish that there was like an AmeriCorps for journalism, because we badly need it, right? It's, they're like, I'm not the first guy to say, but there's a real kind of crisis of like actual real reporting. And so, yeah, I'm just really fond of the idea of like, of supporting journalists early in their career.
What's the longest feature? What's the first feature that you're across 1,000 words?
Oh yeah.
Maybe you're not. Yeah. What's the first, like,
the big one?
Multi-1,000 word thing. What's the first big one that is their big one?
Yeah. The first big one was when I was 26. I got the opportunity to write the cover story for Inc. And it was on Aaron Levy at Box. So this was before Box had gone public, and I was sent out to spend a few days with Aaron and basically unpack what made Box successful as a company. And I spoke with Aaron, obviously. I remember went to a Vietnamese restaurant. He's a very charismatic guy. I like Aaron a lot. And then I spoke with a number of venture capitalists who had made pretty significant investments in the company. Spoke with a lot of employees. And I loved the reporting part, because the reporting part was the learning part. I still say this, like, I actually hate writing. I don't like writing. I find it very painful. I like having written, but the process of writing to me is not the fun part. The fun part is going out and exploring and coming back with some kind of interesting insights. So that was a unique experience for me to be able to write that story at a relatively young age, and go through the process of what it was like to really, go through the fact checking, all the artwork that had to be created, kind of creating, just a whole package of the story. I learned a lot from doing that.
When you have a big thing like that, especially the first time you have a big thing like that, there's that almost like baby genius, where do you go now moment. Like,
Yeah.
You've achieved this thing. How are you supposed to outdo it again?
Yeah.
What was the feeling after you submitted that? You knew it was going. You have the cover story. You're 26 years old.
Yeah. Well, I have a very clear answer. I left the job.
How and why? Who'd you talk to?
Yeah.
To decide to do it?
Yeah. So I remember, I mean, this is like, when I think back on these things, they all make sense now, but I think I had reached the sort of peak of what I wanted to do at that magazine, which was write the cover story. I did that. And then I just see this in myself. I get a little bored. I want to take on a new challenge. And there was, at the time, there was a media startup that was recruiting, and it was called Vocative. Very interesting company. They were hiring these like really top-notch journalists from around the world. And they basically approached me. It was like a cool Vice. It was like a Vice kind of knockoff. And, so I joined Vocative as like a business and technology reporter in late 2013 when I was 26 or 27. And, like they were kind of, that was a good like window into a business that is very much like putting the wings on an airplane as it's taking off. Got to see kind of media from a different side. And my experiences up until that point were very legacy media, Vanity Fair, Inc., which had been around for, a few decades, at least, and really had this great print product. Vocative was purely online, got to do great reporting, but there was no business model. There was just like no business. I mean, it was funded by a very wealthy guy, and there were aspirations of, certain partnerships that never seemed to materialize. But, this was like the golden era of like mid 2010s, a lot of digital media. This is when like BuzzFeed was really big and growing, and Mike.com, if you remember that one. This was like the golden age of digital media companies on the web. And it was kind of a boom and bust cycle. That was the boom. And then there was a bust. And my sort of, after Vocative, I freelanced. I wrote for Newsweek. I wrote for the New Yorker, I wrote for GQ, a bunch of other sort of national magazines. But I kind of, by the time I was writing for the New Yorker and did these like kind of long form stories on the private prison industry, I really this was by my late 20s. I kind of wanted out of the media business. I was kind of, I saw the writing on the wall of an industry that really was consolidating. And also, this was kind of at the rise of where the distrust in media was kind of taking off. It was like 2015, 2016. And so even though I was getting the opportunity to publish in really high quality places like the New Yorker and having that experience, the reception to it felt very siloed. There were certain kind of groups of people that said, wow, that's amazing. You're doing great reporting. And then I remember being at like some sort of social event, and I mentioned that I wrote for the New Yorker, and the guy that I was speaking with just said, that's fake news. And I just remember thinking like, wow, like, even a place like the New Yorker is now, into a certain not insignificant portion of the population, fake news. And so I thought creatively I had kind of achieved what I wanted to achieve in journalism. I had, gotten the opportunity to work on some big stories and travel the country and the world and do cool stuff. But, ultimately, by the time I was 28, 29, I look back and I just think, I just wanted another challenge. It wasn't as intellectually stimulating. There was no sort of business case to really even stay in journalism at that point. And frankly, like the more like intellectually stimulating stuff was coming outside of journalism.
So what's creeping in around the edges in that field besides the sense of distrust?
Well, the business model is collapsing, right? So Google and basically like all the, the platforms were completely eating into just eroding the business model. There was no advertising business model left in journalism. And this was before Substack, right? This was before there was the sort of independent creator-led economy of journalism creators. So there was like a period in which, and still does to some degree, but it felt kind of dire in media. And, on a personal level, I was, getting married, eventually wanting to start a family, settle down. It felt like an industry that was constantly in flux, and I had two choices. One, I could stay in the industry and try to, like work myself up the sort of ladder in some organization, some legacy place, and just kind of hold on for dear life that job would stay, or basically challenge myself and try to do something entirely new. Obviously, I chose the latter.
When and where along the lines do you meet your now wife?
We met on her 20th birthday in college at NYU at a little bar called the Dove on Thompson Street.
So you guys meet.
We meet.
You don't get married at 21.
We don't get married. No, we dated, and this is, there's a long story here. Dated, didn't date, became friends, came back to each other after many years. I pursued her, and timing wasn't right, but we met in 2008, and then eventually got back together in 2015, and got married in 2018.
When you're navigating this thing of choosing to move on, so you're already in a serious relationship at this point?
Yeah.
Is she part of that decision? Are you bouncing this offer like, I think I'm going to walk away from this journalism thing? Is she there for that?
100%. Yeah, she was I think we both look at each other as all the big pivot points in our careers have only happened because of the support of each other. I certainly wouldn't have left journalism had I not had the comfort and the encouragement of her to do that. And likewise, I think she feels similarly, or I think she tells me she feels similarly, that she made some big career pivots and decisions based on my belief in her and my encouragement of her. So we have a really interesting creative partnership. My camera's blurred because my office is a mess, but if it weren't blurred, she was in my office the other day. She's working on her second novel, and we've been whiteboarding like her different plot points for her second book on my whiteboard behind me. And so that's, our relationship is very much like just personal partnership, but also creative partnership. And that's been really like a real joy of my life.
This is a beautiful thing. And what about like the the 3 childhood friends, any mentors? Who else did you talk to when you were getting off the journalism ship?
Gosh, that's a really good question. A lot of peers within the journalism industry that said, yeah, it's time to get out. People who had left, one of my closest friends is now an investor, but he was an entrepreneur, and very close with him, and we talked a lot about it. And me leaving journalism for investing was not totally out of left field. I had kind of talked about it over the years as something I was interested in. I think, given my role as a reporter, where I was really kind of doing the same job as an investor in a lot of ways, which was sourcing ideas, talking to companies, getting a sense of, well, how big is the market potential for this thing that you're talking about? Are you full of shit? Does this product really work? So there was always a sense that maybe I would pursue this field, because I like the idea of, again, doing the research, doing the reporting, but then making a bet instead of writing an article. I liked having written, but the writing itself was like pulling teeth, and ultimately, the investing side always really allured me. So I had some conversations over the years about that with mostly like venture capitalists, because that was kind of initially where I thought maybe I'd go. But I've told the story before, but basically one day in the summer of 2016, I got a phone call from this guy, Dan, and he said, yeah, I work for this hedge fund manager, Arnie, and he's read your writing, and we're looking to hire a research analyst, and would you come down to San Diego and meet us? And I said, sure. And I went down, I met with Arnie, and I instantly thought, like, this guy's super weird, but I like him a lot. Like a strange dude, but very smart, had like a stack of 10Ks on his dining room table. And then at the end of the meeting, which was only like 10 minutes, he was kind of like, okay, so I'll hire you. I said, okay. And I wasn't even really sure what the job was at that point. And Dan said, okay, let's go get lunch. So I said, is Arnie coming? And he said, no, Arnie doesn't come to lunch. And so I had lunch with Dan that day. And this was, in San Diego in 2016. And basically, Dan explained that Arnie's this really interesting guy. He's a money manager. He's kind of like a core group of great clients. And he's brought me and this other guy, Zach, on to build out, an investment management business. And Arnie likes your writing. He read that cover story of Aaron Levy, on cloud computing. At the time, Arnie was doing like a kind of pretty big, deep research into the cloud. And my article, I guess, was one of the better ways of writing about the cloud and researching cloud that he had seen. And, like I'm sure you can experience, you can attest to in your own life. I mean, timing is everything. The timing was right for me to take kind of a leap. And I joined what was then, just the four of us at Worm Capital.
You get there, you say, I've seen marketing, I've seen branding, I've written cover stories. With a name like Worm, I mean, we're at least going to give those cockroach portfolio guys a run for the money. Like, what did you think about the name? I'm just curious. What was your gut on that?
Again, like very strange. I mean, so this was before Nightview Capital was originally Worm Capital. Arnie wanted to choose a name that was instantly recognizable. And he also, I think, had in him kind of a deep, I don't think he'll mind if I say this, a deep loathing of sort of traditional Wall Street, like veneer of whatever it is, the suits and the ties and the fancy offices. He hated that. He just hated it. And he was like a real staunch advocate for, no, the only thing that matters is the numbers. Everything else is bullshit. So put up good numbers, people will like us. And we were kind of like, all right, it would be nice to do both, have a normal firm name and do good work. But he was really adamant. And he also had some sort of idea that he was a big fan of Johnny Cash. He's a big fan of Johnny Cash. And Johnny Cash has the song A Boy Named Sue. And that's what he was kind of doing with us, was tossing us into the deep end, basically running a hedge fund with a name like Worm Capital, where we got like literally laughed out of the room in certain situations. And it makes it pretty tough, like pretty damn tough. You're going up against, sort of like Stone Creek Capital and Alpha Bridge, and you're like, well, we're here for a Worm Capital.
No, this is for your mom, because I know she's still with us listening to this, and we had her put her earmuffs on for the bridge part. But the who actually wrote Boy Named Sue? Can you throw your mom a bone? Do you know who it was?
Who actually wrote it?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm not putting you on the spot to be mean.
It's not Johnny Cash?
This is my English teacher mom story from my childhood too.
Who is it?
Obsessed with that song. Shel Silverstein.
Really?
It's a Shel Silverstein poem. Yeah.
Okay.
This is very playful thing that Johnny Cash figured out how to incept into this song and turn into this cultural piece that's been there for all of us, and all these people know it. But it's just a children's poem.
I love that.
It's really cool.
That is really cool.
It's really beautiful. I want to ask you about, and I know I'm skipping forward a little bit in this thing, but I want to talk about this before we do some summary and notes. The reason I kept asking so much about your friends and that friend group, and I wanted to know more about your wife and when she came into the picture, because I just have this sense of how you guys solve problems together. And I have the sense of this, it's your trusted journalists network of people that you do research and then you come back to before you go execute the bet or the idea or write the thing. And I'm just curious. I don't want to go and relitigate the amazing story that you shared about your health experience. I'll encourage people to do that. You tell me where the best place for somebody to hear that version is. But the role your wife played in getting a second scan, and the role, was it Ben Jacobs? Was that the friend that you called?
That's right.
Can you just talk about the two of them?
Yeah.
Just as your network inside of going through a traumatic event. Tell some of the backstory if you want, but those relationships fascinate me.
So I think that what I realized about my network in that moment was that without that network, I'd be dead. That is 100% true. So the backstory is I got really sick last year, January 23. Doctors couldn't figure out what it was. Long story short, I was misdiagnosed with some relatively benign inner ear infection that ended up being not a benign inner ear infection at all, but a very deadly, what turned out to be a brain abscess that could have popped at any point, basically killing me on the spot. So my wife, who quite literally kept me alive through that month, I was incapacitated. I was in bed. I lost about 30 pounds in a little over a month. Couldn't keep down any food, but she was just basically quite literally keeping me going. So that's kind of first part of the story. The second part of the story is when, as you said, she pushed for a second scan. Without that second scan, I'd be dead. But once that second scan happens, I immediately realize this is, I need to lean on my network to ensure my survival. So I, of course, immediately called my wife. She met me at the hospital. But I also called my friend Ben Jacobs, who he's the entrepreneur that I mentioned who, worked as an investor, and him and his wife are partially the reason we live in Portland. We're very close friends with them. And I kind of said, hey, look, this is bad news. If anything happens to me, take care of, Rachel and B. And he's a very sort of immediate problem solving kind of guy. And so immediately I called his friend from high school, this guy, Zach Medras, who had just finished up his neurosurgery residency at Stanford and moved to Portland, and said, you got to call Zach. Zach's the brain surgeon friend. Let's see what he can do. So that night, Zach took a look at the scans and said, yeah, you need brain surgery, right away. And I'll do it. And I'll take on your case. I, have this sort of because you're a friend of a friend. And, have a strong desire to help you. So long story short, not to bury the lead, Zach saved my life. What they thought could have been terminal brain cancer wasn't. It was this bizarre abscess, and I survived. And there was, many months of recovery. I'm still not, totally, cognitively, I'm all there for better or worse, as my wife would say. Physically, I have, some issues, mostly just like dizziness, manageable stuff. But yeah, that network, I think a lot about now is like, that the sort of safety net, the people around you, are incredibly important, especially in these moments of kind of extreme duress. And I think about my network and my friendships differently after this experience. So we live like in an increasingly disconnected world. And I think as great as it is that we can live anywhere we want, it actually is very anomalous when it comes to just historically how people have lived. And, one of the things that I really, really wanted to do coming out of this experience was like see my closest friends who, as I mentioned, like the guys who live in North Carolina, Massachusetts, Berlin, like get them all together because life is short. These are like my brothers. I really want to just be around them. So I threw myself like a survival party last October, and everyone flew in from around. It was great. I mean, everyone flew in. It was basically like a bachelor party, except it was for my survival. And we rented a big house on the Oregon coast, and I had like 8 or 9 of my closest guy friends fly in from around the world. And I just think, that we don't do enough of this kind of stuff. Like we live in these sort of atomized little universes. And I think it's sad that I think there's been a loss of community. And community is both like fun, as it should be, but it's also, I think, like necessary to survival. I think a lot about these concepts now, like what it takes to survive. How do we live a long and fulfilling life? And I increasingly believe that being close beyond just digitally to people that you really love is a source of real strength, both when shit hits the fan, proverbially speaking, but also on an ongoing basis that it's life affirming. And if you look at all the studies of basically the people who have lived the longest, it's all people who have like really tight knit communities. So I'm trying to embody that a little bit. I'm not great at it, but I still haven't convinced my friends to come out again. It's challenging with little kids and everything, but that's the goal.
That's a goal worth talking about. I got some notes. I want to go over some notes with you. I'm going to invite you to freely interrupt me as I go through these. That's the whole idea of doing this. So interrupt away. Wreak havoc on these notes. I love this words and math shared common interest thing as a kid. I think that is absolutely fantastic. And I noted it like the Boxcar Boys thing. Like this idea of like story and puzzle solving might be some of the most it's algebra. It's algebra. You're like, wait, there are variable here I can isolate and solve for. Do you feel like you grasp that because of your parents, or is this just, do you attribute any of that to them?
I attribute everything to them in some level. So yeah, good and bad.
Good and bad.
We'll even give them the idea of walking over that George Washington Bridge and not realizing there's the gate in the middle. That's a fantastic story too. I love that you said Manhattan was your first love. I think, and maybe it's just as also a tri-state area kid, there's something about the city, because that's always the city in the tri-state area. And then there's the other cities. There's the Bostons, there's the Phillies, which I'm equidistant, or I grew up equidistant to like Philly and New York, but it's like, there's the city and then there's Philly. But they hold this special place, and falling in love with just the creative potentiality of those spots, especially when you kind of like live the city without the city as a kid. This idea of these 3 friends from the synagogue, Cub Scouts, and like the friend of a friend who are outside of your school system. That is some city shit that you were living in like elementary school. Did you ever think about that? Like you were building New York City for yourself before you got there?
No, but I like that. I'll use that going forward. But yeah, one of those friends was actually in Manhattan. He grew up on the Upper West Side, and so there was like was always going into Manhattan to hang out, but then coming back out.
I love this concept, going in and coming back out of Manhattan and just raising your awareness probably every time. And it ties to this other idea here. There's this life having these big leverage moments, these turning points, and making it important. So it's not just that life throws the stakes at you; it's the importance you attach to it, the ambitions that you put to it. And you said this when you were talking about Essie and the job at Inc. Getting that first paid internship like journalism career. But those big leverage moments, they're not all life or death. You had life or death too.
Yeah.
But like you have to attach importance to those. You have to find the story and what you're going to raise to the top.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that they are true without a doubt, that your life is like a series of a few really big moments, kind of like to use like a film term. What is the term? You probably know better than me. Like a key action sequence, forget what it's called. A set point. Right. And but it's often not clear in the moment which ones are which ones are important, which aren't. So I don't even know back then if that internship to me registered as like, this is an important moment. But clearly 25 years later or whatever it is, it's a very important moment in my life.
The ambition registered, the tenacity by which you approached the internship matter. Yeah, that part clearly registered in the story, even if you didn't understand the role it would play later. This, to be a good writer, you have to be a good learner. Like, put it on, hang it in the loop, as they say. That is an outstanding. I'm really fascinated by this, the 250 words to the 1,000 words to the 10,000 word essays when you're, not being Hunter S. Thompson. This balancing act between writing for your editor and writing for the audience. Do you remember that coming into focus for you? Like what the editor's asking for and what you think the readers want and what they're looking for?
I think I started writing for myself, which was probably a mistake, right? I was thinking that's like the Hunter S. Thompson thing. But I think in some ways, I actually think the easiest way to write is to pick one person who you want to write to and write to that person. Writing for a big audience is really hard because everyone has different desires. So write for one person, and that helps clarify things a bit.
You talked about leaving media, just as seeing that distrust of media hitting a record level when all of a sudden the New Yorker is now something where that's fake news, and having these two choices to stay in the industry and hold on or challenge yourself and move on. And that led you to the investment business with this idea of doing the research, doing the reporting, but instead of a post on the other side, making the bet. It's after the cover story, leaving the job, this whole betting thing.
Yeah.
Where betting, gambling, that were odds, was this stuff? Were you a poker kid? Like what?
Oh yeah, I still am. I think, in another world, I just would have been a professional poker player. I still play pretty often. I do like risk. I think I've come to realize that about myself. And I think if I think about even my career as just a series of like kind of high risk maneuvers, going into like journalism, it's not really a safe bet. And then going into leaving journalism, which is, I already had like a good thing going in journalism, and then kind of blowing that up to leave to go to another high risk endeavor. I think I'm attracted to it because I think life's more fun this way, and I think like I also just like games of strategy, where there's a winner and a loser, and the stakes are high. As we were talking about before, like I was on the debate team in high school, and like no one in their right mind would think of debate as like a sport of strategy, but to me it was like it was a high risk, high reward type of sport, and I just like things like that. So yeah, I still like hitting the poker table whenever I can.
That's awesome. I also love this idea. I'm going to hang this up with the other one. This concept of the people in your head, you need this network of ideas, and outside of your head, you need this network of people, and you actually need both of them. There's a combinatorial value of the network of ideas in your head, the experiences that you store up here, and then this network of people that you keep around you, because that's not only how you ensure survival, that's how you evolve and change over lives, careers, kids. It's this ideas and community piece again. And there's echoes. There's Arnie telling you, like, just, I put a sign on it outside of the real estate, or the Arnie becomes your, like, put a sign on it outside the real estate guy by just saying, like, let's just put up good numbers.
Yeah, totally. I like that. I like the idea of both I think the way you put it, the combinatorial value of both people and ideas. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, it's a really fantastic and beautiful thing. Eric, I want you to tell the people, Nightcrawler, Big Think, all the things. Tell people where to find you if they want to learn more and follow along. I'm an active subscriber of all these things already. He didn't ask for that endorsement. I'm just giving.
Thank you.
Tell the people where to find you if they want to find more and follow what you're up to.
Yeah, just follow me on Twitter, and then you'll see all the links there. It's the easiest place.
Eric Markowitz, you're truly an intentional investor. Thank you so much for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at epsilontheory on Twitter.